Can a loveless marriage turn into something real? When Richard Carter, a cold yet fiercely ambitious millionaire, signed a marriage contract with Elena, a passionate artist, they both believed it was nothing more than a mutually beneficial arrangement. No emotions, no promises for the future. But life never goes according to plan. Elena, with hands that could paint raw emotions onto a canvas, soon discovered that beneath Richard's composed exterior lay deep, unspoken wounds. And Richard, a man who once dismissed love as nothing more than fleeting sentiment, found his heart betraying him every time he looked at her. But when the past resurfaces and buried secrets begin to unravel, will their fragile love be strong enough to withstand the storm? A story of fate, inner conflicts, and love found in the most unexpected places. Dive into this emotional journey and stay tuned because the most unexpected twists are yet to come. Ethan Carter stood in silence before the expansive glass window of his lavish penthouse, his gaze fixed on the lush greenery of Westlake Park. The city beneath him pulsed with life, a never-ending stream of headlights weaving through the streets. Inside, everything was immaculate. The refined decor, the faint scent of sandalwood lingering in the air, but none of it could fill the emptiness gnawing at his chest. Ethan, a strikingly handsome and accomplished millionaire, had built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up, turning it into a formidable empire. Wealth, power, prestige, he had exceeded all expectations. Yet as he held his grandfather's will in his hands, a heavy weight pressed down on him. If he didn't marry, he would lose his inheritance, which meant losing the very company he had devoted his life to building. His grip tightened around the document. Ethan had once loved deeply, only for that love to end in betrayal and heartbreak. He had trusted, he had given everything, and all he had received in return was disappointment. Since then, he had stopped believing in love, replacing it with skepticism and caution. Now faced with his current predicament, a loveless marriage was the only viable solution. There was no room for emotion, this was strictly business. And so he resolved to find a wife in the most pragmatic way possible. He picked up his phone, his voice deep and resolute. "I want to hire the best matchmaking service in the city. Find me someone suitable." His tone was as serious as if he were handling any other business transaction. Within days, a thick folder landed on his desk. Ethan skimmed through photographs and brief bios of potential candidates, but none held his attention for more than a few seconds. He needed someone who understood boundaries, no emotional entanglements, no complications, and absolute discretion. Reaching for his pen, he scrawled a single, non-negotiable condition. On mom's paper. Complete confidentiality. The sharp strokes of his handwriting mirrored the steely determination in his heart. This marriage would be built on a contract, not on love. But no matter how meticulously he planned, could he truly control everything, or was he about to be swept into a game he never saw coming? Elena Evans sat motionless by the window of her tiny apartment, the glow of the street lamp casting long shadows across the pile of overdue bills on her table. Her grip tightened around her paintbrush, her fingertips turning pale. The half-finished painting before her did nothing to quiet the anxiety constricting her chest. In just a few days, she would be evicted. Art was her life, her soul, but the world seemed determined to crush her dreams beneath the weight of reality. When her phone rang, she startled. Clara, her best friend, spoke from the other end, her voice clear, carrying an unbelievable proposition. Elena let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Marry a millionaire for 5 years. That sounds like the plot of a cheap romance novel." But as Clara continued, the laughter faded from Elena's lips. Her heartbeat slowed, each word sinking in like a tempting whisper. A marriage on paper, a sum of money that could change her life. She swallowed hard, her palms suddenly damp. After a long silence, she took a deep breath and murmured, "I want to meet him." Their first meeting was brief but unforgettable. Ethan sat composed in a sleek leather chair, his piercing blue eyes studying her with an unreadable expression. The room was so quiet that Elena could hear the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. He wasted no time, his voice smooth and unwavering. "I need a wife. Not for love, but to fulfill a clause in my grandfather's will. 5 years you'll have financial security, and in return I require absolute discretion." Elena listened, her fingers curling around the armrest. She wasn't one to accept things blindly. A flicker of challenge sparked in her gaze as she arched a brow and said slowly, "Mr. Carter, if I agree, I need assurance that my art will remain unrestricted. I need my freedom." Ethan tilted his head slightly, a hint of a smirk ghosting his lips, as if her response was exactly what he had expected. "Fine, as long as you keep this arrangement strictly confidential." Elena met his gaze, thoughts racing. Her life was about to take an entirely different turn. Her fingers tightened on the fabric of her dress. She didn't know if this was the right choice, but she knew one thing: no one would extinguish the fire of her passion, and this might be her only chance to keep that flame alive. "Then we have a deal," she said firmly. The contract was drafted and signed within a week. Ethan and Elena's wedding was a quiet, private affair, devoid of fanfare, nothing more than a legal formality. Yet as he looked at her, Ethan couldn't ignore the subtle shift within him. Her fierce spirit and unwavering dedication to her art were a stark contrast to the rigid world of business he inhabited. As they settled into their new reality, their differences became increasingly apparent. Ethan was disciplined and reserved, while Elena was impulsive and untamed, like a gust of wind refusing to be contained. They argued endlessly, yet amidst the chaos, there were rare moments of unexpected understanding. One evening, Elena burst into Ethan's office, her hands smudged with still wet paint. Her hair was disheveled, her breath unsteady, and her eyes burned with fury. "You cannot seriously be considering a merger with Baxter Corp. They're notorious for their shady dealings. Don't you know that?" Ethan looked up momentarily, thrown off by her sudden entrance. She stormed in like a whirlwind, strands of paint-streaked hair falling across her face. Her fiery gaze locked onto him. Her breath came in sharp bursts, as if she had just sprinted straight from a battle with herself. "Elena, business decisions are my domain, not yours." Ethan slowly set his pen down, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. There was something oddly amusing about her disheveled but fiercely determined stance. "But I appreciate your concern." She folded her arms across her chest, leaning slightly forward as if ready for a fight. "Oh, give me a break, Ethan. Your domain. We're partners, remember?" Her voice was laced with challenge, her piercing gaze cutting through his composed exterior. Neither of them realized it yet, but they had gradually allowed each other into their supposedly private lives. They discussed their work, offered opinions, and unknowingly became entangled in each other's worlds. Outwardly, Ethan dismissed Elena's interference, but deep down her insights often lingered in his mind, influencing his decisions in ways he never admitted. Just as he, in his own way, had shaped the finer nuances of her art. In the months that followed, their marriage settled into an unusual rhythm. Heated arguments were punctuated by moments of quiet companionship, late-night meals eaten in silence, fleeting glances exchanged unintentionally, the simple presence of one another in the same space. When Elena's art career began gaining traction, a prestigious gallery invited her to host a solo exhibition. She threw herself into her work with relentless passion, sleepless nights, canvases piling up around her colors, merging on fabric. Her fingers, even her face, as if she had become one with the world she was creating. Ethan, at first indifferent to her work, found himself drawn in. On many late nights, he stood in the doorway of her studio, watching as her brushstrokes moved with both force and emotion. It wasn't just curiosity, It was something else, something unspoken. He realized that her devotion to art mirrored his own dedication to high-stakes deals and boardroom negotiations. She was not just the woman he needed to fulfill a marriage contract. She was a storm, a force of nature pulling him in whether he wanted it or not. Their relationship, still bound by the contract, was shifting in ways neither of them had anticipated. Late-night conversations stretched longer, drifting into shared memories, dreams, and fears. They found solace in each other, like two lost souls stumbling upon an unexpected anchor amidst life's turbulence. And yet the contract loomed over them like a shadow, a constant reminder that it was all just an arrangement, nothing more, nothing less. That night, after the opening of Elena's art exhibition, they sat together on the couch in the dimly lit living room. She leaned back, gazing absently at the city lights beyond the window. Loose strands of hair framed her face, paint still smudged on her fingertips. She turned to him, her voice barely more than a whisper in the quiet room. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if this were real?" Ethan hesitated, his sharp blue eyes flickering with something unreadable. He exhaled slowly, as if weighing his words. Then almost absent-mindedly, he reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingertips grazing her skin in a gesture so natural he didn't even notice it. "Sometimes." His voice was low, like a confession he wasn't ready to make. "But we both know why we're here." His words cut through her like a cold wind, dragging her back to reality. Elena pressed her lips together, her fingers curling slightly against the fabric of her dress. She wasn't a fool yet. Somehow the answer she had anticipated still tightened in her chest. The room fell into silence save for the warm glow of the lamp, casting long, uncertain shadows on the walls. One day, Ethan received a call from his lawyer. The voice on the other end was measured but firm, each word landing with heavy finality. "Ethan, there's a clause in your grandfather's will that we overlooked. To inherit everything, you don't just need to be married. You have to prove that the marriage is real, with genuine love and commitment." His grip on the phone tightened, his palm suddenly damp. He stood frozen in his office, staring blankly at the space before him, his mind swirling like a raging storm. That evening, Elena found him still sitting in the living room, unmoving. He hadn't been this unsettled in a long time. She took a seat across from him, studying the tension in his expression. "Ethan, what's wrong? You look like someone just hit you with a wrecking ball." He took a slow breath, set his phone down, and met her gaze. "There's a clause in the will that I didn't know about. I don't just have to be married, I have to prove this marriage is real. That there's love, if not, I lose everything." Elena blinked, her lips pressing together, but there was no anger or mockery in her expression. After a moment, she tilted her head slightly, her voice calmer than he had expected. "Then, we can make it real." Ethan's brows drew together. "What do you mean?" She leaned back against the couch, slowly intertwining her fingers. "Our contract still has a few years left. If we have to live together anyway, why not actually try to understand each other, to see if love is even possible? Pretending to be happily married for years won't be easy. If we're going to do this, why not give it a real shot? At least that way you'd have a real chance." Ethan studied her carefully, something shifting inside him. The idea should have been laughable, absurd, and yet, something about what she said made him pause. All this time they had fought, challenged, and pushed each other, but they had never truly opened up. Would it be different if they did? He let out a slow breath, his gaze softening slightly. "Do you really think this could work?" Elena shrugged the corners of her lips, curving not quite a smile, but not unwilling either. "There's only one way to find out. But Ethan, if we do this, you have to be all in. I don't do things halfway." A quiet chuckle escaped him, the first lightness he had felt all day. All right, let's try. Outside the window, the city lights flickered against the dark sky, as if holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. When they both tried to turn their marriage into something real, they never expected the challenges to come crashing down like a storm. It was a late afternoon in an upscale bar downtown. The atmosphere was subdued, the dim golden lights reflecting off a glass of deep red wine. Ethan sat alone at the bar, gently swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze lost in the distance. Long time no see. The voice made his hand freeze mid-motion. He turned his head, locking eyes with a face he knew all too well. Claire. She was still as beautiful as ever, golden hair and soft waves piercing blue eyes, but there was something different in her gaze now. Something sharp, probing, laced with unspoken meaning. Ethan didn't react immediately. He set his glass down, meeting her eyes with calm composure. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Claire slid onto the stool next to him, a faint smirk on her lips. And yet here we are. She ordered a cocktail and then glanced at his hand, her gaze lingering on the wedding ring. Marriage, huh? I read about it in the papers. She tilted her head slightly, her tone laced with amusement. But funny thing is, you don't look like a man in love. Ethan didn't respond. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, letting the sharp burn run down his throat. Claire continued, her eyes studying him as if she could see straight through him. I've heard things, from a few old friends, that your marriage isn't exactly conventional. Ethan let out a quiet scoff, shaking his head. You always did love prying into my life. Claire set her drink down, leaning in slightly, her voice slow and deliberate. Ethan, do you love her? His fingers tightened slightly around the glass. Such a simple question, yet he couldn't answer it right away. That's none of your business, he said curtly, but that only made Claire chuckle softly. If you truly loved her, I wouldn't see hesitation in your eyes. Her voice was gentle, almost regretful. Then she sighed. Ethan, we had everything once. I know I made mistakes, but Ethan set his glass down with a quiet thud, cutting her off. Mistakes. A mirthless laugh escaped him. You betrayed me, Claire. And now you think a few words can undo all that? Claire didn't flinch under his gaze. I don't expect forgiveness. But if your marriage is just a facade, if you're still lost, then why don't we try again? Ethan held her gaze for a long moment before shaking his head. No. A simple, unwavering answer. He stood up, placed money on the bar, and grabbed his coat. Just before leaving, he paused, his voice low and firm. I'm not the man I was back then, Claire. And you're no longer the woman I once loved. Claire watched him walk away, her fingers tightening around her glass. She had been right, Ethan wasn't happy. But some wounds, even when they didn't bleed, never truly healed. For Ethan, when he thought of Claire, the first thing that filled his mind was the resentment for what she had done to him. But the deep emotions he had yet to overcome still lingered. It wasn't just Claire. Marcus Elena's ex-lover came back like a sudden storm, shattering everything they were trying to build. One night, Elena walked into the house, her expression weighed down with heavy thoughts. She set her purse on the table, her shoulders sagging, as if carrying an invisible burden. Ethan watched her, his gaze sharp but his voice controlled. What happened? Elena exhaled, her hands unconsciously wringing together. Marcus came to see me today. He said he never stopped loving me, that the only reason he left was because he failed in his career and didn't want to burden me when things got tough. The room fell into an unbearable silence. Ethan stood motionless, his fingers subtly curling into fists. His chest rose and fell, as if he were restraining himself against an unseen storm. More than that, their marriage had always been a facade. No matter how hard they tried to play their roles in front of the world, misunderstandings, whispers, and scrutinizing eyes were inevitable. They had suffocated under the weight of it. But instead of letting go, they began to lean on each other. Together, they attended counseling sessions, learned to listen, instead of just speaking their own minds. Conversations that once felt like obligations became lifelines, pulling them closer with each passing night. Each evening, Ethan found himself standing outside Elena's art studio, watching her move through her paintings with an intensity that captivated him. And Elena, once believing Ethan was too rational, too cold, now saw the patience and sincerity in his every action. Gradually, what had started as a marriage on paper became something real, something profound. And perhaps from the very beginning, what they needed was never a contract, but a chance to truly understand each other. One afternoon, Elena stepped into Ethan's office, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Her eyes darkened as she spotted Claire leaning against his desk, golden curls cascading over her shoulder, a smile filled with hidden meaning. Elena crossed her arms, her voice icy enough to slice through the air. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I interrupting something?" Ethan shot up from his seat, his fingers tightening around the edge of his desk, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. He took a step back, putting distance between himself and Claire, his expression stricken. "Elena, it's not what it looks like." Elena let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." She turned on her heel, each step slicing through the silence. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a suffocating tension hanging between Ethan and Claire. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, ruffling the dark strands in frustration. His throat felt dry, as if every explanation had caught somewhere between regret and desperation. Just when he thought he and Elena had finally found solid ground, another storm came crashing down. Ethan uncovered a financial discrepancy he couldn't trace. The news spread like wildfire, threatening not only the survival of Sterling Enterprises, but also dragging both his and Elena's names into a ruthless scandal. For the next week, Ethan buried himself in meetings, his phone never silent, papers piling up before him. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, stealing seconds of rest, but never truly sleeping. He threw himself into work like a cornered beast, severing contact with Elena without even realizing it. At first, Elena waited. But as the days passed, she felt the growing distance. She sat at an empty dinner table each night, stared at unanswered messages, ignored calls. She told herself he was just busy until eventually the ache in her chest became undeniable. One late night, Elena stepped into Ethan's office. He looked up, eyes weary yet sharp. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "How much longer do you plan on doing this?" Ethan looked into her eyes, and for the first time in days, he realized he wasn't just on the verge of losing his company. He was on the verge of losing the most precious thing in his life. The feeling of abandonment drove Elena deeper into the world of painting, each brushstroke on the canvas, an attempt to release the emptiness gnawing at her soul. Every night, she sat silently by her easel, her vacant eyes tracing the blending hues, though her mind remained restless. Unexpectedly, Marcus appeared, offering a kind of support and encouragement she hadn't known she needed. Ethan realized his mistake too late. He spotted Elena with Marcus at a small cafe, their conversation warm, her laughter radiant in a way he hadn't seen in far too long. His breathing grew heavy, his chest tightened. Unable to stand it, he stormed toward them, grabbing Marcus by the collar, his eyes burning with fury. "Stay away from my wife." Marcus remained unfazed, a smirk playing at his lips. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention to her, it wouldn't have come to this." Elena gasped, her hands trembling. She never expected things to escalate this way. Looking at Ethan, she saw not just anger in his eyes, but regret and an unspoken fear that sent a chill through her. It seemed like their relationship had fractured beyond repair, but fate had other plans. The crisis at Ethan's company pulled them back together in ways neither of them had foreseen. He discovered that the financial losses threatening his company stemmed from Harold, a trusted business partner. The scandal jeopardized not only his career, but also the fragile remnants of his marriage. Ethan threw himself into the investigation, poring over documents night after night, his mind consumed by cold numbers and shady transactions. But this time, Elena didn't stand on the sidelines. Instead, she chose to stand beside him. Every night, she quietly placed a steaming cup of coffee next to him, her fingers gently pressing into his tense shoulders, offering him warmth in the middle of the storm. Together, they pieced together the truth, connecting fragments of evidence until Harold's betrayal was laid bare. With the company saved and the traitor exposed, Ethan found himself standing outside his office after a long, exhausting day. He turned to Elena, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "We did this together." His voice was hoarse, no longer the confident, unshakable man he used to be, but a husband who desperately wanted to hold on to the woman before him. Elena met his gaze, and for once there was no distance, no doubt, only sincerity and a determination to never lose each other again. This time she didn't pull away. On their 5-year anniversary, Ethan prepared a surprise for Elena. But it wasn't a contract extension. It was a heartfelt proposal. He knelt before her, eyes filled with unwavering devotion, his fingers clutching a small velvet box with a gleaming ring inside. "Elena, this time there are no conditions, no obligations, just my love for you. Marry me not for anything else, but for us, for everything we've been through together." Elena stared at him, her breath hitching. Her hands trembled as she touched her lips, as if trying to convince herself that this moment was real. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and with a smile that lit up her entire face, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure? Sure that you want this not for any other reason but love?" Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. Elena let out a soft, tearful laugh before throwing herself into his arms. "Yes, I do." His arms wrapped around her, warmth spreading between them like an unspoken vow. No contracts, no pretense, just two hearts beating as one. Their marriage, once riddled with complications and trials, now stood strong, built on honesty and trust. They were no longer bound by duty, but by a love that had withstood every storm. Years later, in a sunlit living room, Ethan and Elena sat together on the sofa, watching their children play. Laughter echoed through the space, filling it with the simple joy they had always dreamed of. Elena leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her voice as soft as a breeze. "Did you ever think we'd come this far?" Ethan chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd fall in love with you, I probably would have laughed. But now, I can't imagine my life without you." She looked up at him, her eyes warm with affection. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a quiet reminder that no matter the trials they faced, the most important thing was that they had found each other in this vast world. No marriage is perfect, but theirs was proof that even the most complicated beginnings could become something beautiful so long as both people were willing to fight for it. Ethan smirked, his eyes twinkling, as he looked at Elena before placing a playful kiss on the top of her head. "Do you remember the time you barged into my office covered in paint?" His voice carried a teasing warmth. Elena tilted her head against his shoulder, a soft smile playing on her lips. "How could I forget? You looked like you'd just seen a ghost." Ethan laughed, the memory as vivid as ever. She had burst into his office, her hair streaked with red and blue paint, hands raised in sheer panic, while his pristine white shirt bore the brunt of a bright splash of color. Her eyes had been wide, her mouth stumbling over explanations, utterly failing to hide her embarrassment. He remembered standing there frozen for a moment, before suddenly breaking into laughter, ignoring her mortified expression. Elena had simply stared at him, cheeks burning, as if she had been caught in a terrible crime. She hadn't known then that in that very moment, she had etched herself permanently into his heart. Elena recalled it just as clearly, how her heart had pounded wildly, first from panic, then from something else entirely. Because Ethan's laughter hadn't been filled with annoyance, only amusement, and something softer. Something she hadn't recognized at the time. As if she were the most fascinating thing he had ever encountered. Through the years, their love had transformed from a cold contract to a bond forged in hardship and trust. They had weathered misunderstandings, moments of near loss, and countless trials. But in the end, they had always found their way back to each other. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand, relishing its familiar warmth. No matter what happens, I'll always choose you. Always. Elena looked up at him, her eyes shimmering under the soft glow of the room's light. She didn't need to say anything. She simply squeezed his hand back, letting him feel the silent promise between them. No grand declarations, no extravagant words, just their hands entwined, knowing that as long as they held on to each other, every challenge would be nothing more than a passing storm. Outside the window, a gentle breeze stirred the flowers like a quiet melody playing the song of their love. A love that wasn't loud or perfect, but steady, enduring, and true. Some relationships begin with logic, but end with the heart. Ethan and Elena came together through a marriage contract, but the days they spent by each other's side gradually changed everything. Do you believe that love can bloom from the most unexpected circumstances? If you were in their situation, what choice would you make? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might just inspire someone else. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones. Let's spread the message of love, understanding, and second chances together. No matter how love begins, true love always finds its way to the heart. Wishing you happiness and a heart full of love. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding.